Welcome to lesson 3.4, multiplying decimals. So in this lesson we're going to use probably 3 different methods to multiply decimals, and we're going to be using base 10 blocks, we're going to be using paper and pencil, or writing out the long way, and there will be some situations where you can use a calculator to multiply decimals and to check your work. Kind of as we move through those strategies, the base 10 blocks are a little more hands-on, they're a little more visual. Once you're kind of able to do that, it's moving a little bit more to the abstract and just doing it with paper and pencil and actually writing it out. And then a calculator, I mean, that's kind of the most practical way, because really in everyday life, I'm sure everybody has a phone or a calculator or something on them. That being said, it's also important to know how to do it the long way in case you're ever faced with that situation where maybe you don't have a calculator or you're out shopping and you need to figure something out. So we're going to be doing those 3 different methods to multiply decimals in this lesson. So the first method that we're going to talk about is base 10 blocks, and I've said this in class, it's a little bit hard to show over a video. However, you can look on page 101 and 102, and 100 and 101, and I'll talk briefly about it. But really, we have the base 10 blocks in class, and it really is just a little bit easier to explain it when we have the actual physical blocks in front of us than me trying to draw them out and explain it without having the physical blocks here. So I'm going to just explain kind of the very basics of it and the premise of it. You can just read on page 100 and 101 in your textbook the process of kind of using them and how you find a product of a multiplication equation. That being said, if you need a little bit more support, please come find me in class. And then we will pull out the actual blocks and use the actual manipulatives. Just like I said, it's a little bit more clear and hands-on and easier to explain that way. But basically, base 10 blocks are just a visual way to represent a multiplication equation and to find the product. And you're not actually even doing any multiplication. Simply, you're setting up an equation using the base 10 blocks, and you're counting all of the pieces that you've used to set it up, and I'll give you an example in a second, to find your product. So when we're dealing with base 10 blocks, there are 3 different blocks. So there's a larger square block, and if you look at it closely, and again, I can't really draw it because the details are a little bit too fine. When you count all the little single squares within the one bigger square, there's 100 of them. So it's a 10 by 10 square. And this represents a whole number, or 1. And then we have longer rectangular base 10 blocks, and if you were to count all of the smaller squares within that one, you would count that there's 10 smaller squares within that one. Whoops, sorry, I'm just going to erase that. And in terms of multiplying decimals, that would represent 1/10, or 0.1. And then the third block that we have in this set is just a smaller little unit cube, and this represents 1/100th, or 0.01. And the reason these things represent what they do is because if this is 1/100th, I need 100 of these cubes to make up one whole cube, because I know that if I was to count all of these cubes, that there would be 100 there. This represents 1/10 because I know I need 10 of these long rectangular ones to make up one whole unit. And so again, we're seeing kind of that pattern of tens. I need 10 unit cubes to make up 1/10, and I need 10 tenth rectangles to make up one whole. And so essentially you use the base 10 blocks to set up multiplication equations. So I'm just going to kind of choose an equation or an example here. So let's say 2.2 multiplied by 2.3, and I want to find the product of that equation using base 10 blocks. And again, I'm going to show you how to set it up. I'm not necessarily going to solve it because it's a little bit difficult to draw on this program. So that next step in solving we'll kind of do as a mini lesson for the whole class, and we'll do it together. So you would set up this equation. We set this up essentially by looking at our numbers. So I'm looking at 2.2. I see that I have 2 holes, and I know each of these bigger squares represents 1 hole. So I know that I'm going to need to draw 2 squares. And then I see that I have 2 tenths in that number, and I know that each one of my rectangular ones represents 2 tenths, so I need to draw 2 rectangular. So essentially I've just modeled, using my base 10 blocks, 2.2. 2 wholes and 2 tenths. And so the way we set this up using our base 10 blocks is we read the equation horizontally, so this represents 2.2. And then vertically down this way we need to represent our second number, which is 2.3. So I need to read now from top to bottom. Okay, so I've already modeled with this 2.2, if I'm reading down, I've already modeled one whole number, but I see that I have 2, so I need to draw an extra whole unit square, sorry. So now I've modeled along the side here vertically, I have 2 wholes. However, I still have 3 tenths that I need to take care of, so I need to draw 3 of my rectangular cubes. Whoops, those are all rectangles, sorry for the terrible drawing. But now this is how you begin to set up your equation. So along the top I've modeled 2.2, and then along the side, because I've modeled 2.3. So I'm just going to stop there for now. Essentially what you would do with the actual blocks, and like I said, we'll do a mini lesson, you'll fill this in with remaining base 10 blocks until you have a perfect rectangle, and then you just add up all of your whole numbers, you add up all of the tenths, and once you add them all up, whatever you get, that's your product. So that would be your answer of 2.2 multiplied by 2.3. Again, this is a strategy that's hands-on if you're maybe just learning how to use multiplication. Not super practical, because if I'm in a grocery store and I need to multiply a couple prices together, you know, I'm not going to be carrying base 10 blocks around with me, but it's a nice hands-on way to at least get you starting to think about multiplying decimals and what products are, and it's hands-on, which is nice, where we can use the manipulatives. So the second strategy that we're going to talk about is using whole numbers to multiply decimals, and I'll show you what I mean with an example when I say that. So if my equation that is given to me is, let me just write it down here, let's say 1.7 multiplied by 2.5. And again, kind of where most people get hung up is, where do you place that decimal in your product or in your answer, or where do you even place it when you're multiplying numbers? So that's kind of a concern, and one way to get around that concern is to kind of just take the decimal out of the equation altogether and just multiply the numbers as if they were whole numbers without a decimal, and then place the decimal back into the answer. That being said, that takes a little bit of kind of estimation and some thought about where that decimal goes. So before I even do anything, I'm just going to look at my numbers. And what do my numbers mean? 1.7 and 2.5. So I look at 1.7 and I know that's almost 2. We're almost at a whole number of 2. And then I look at 2.5 and, you know, I've rounded up with 1.7. So I'm just going to keep that at 2, right? It's pretty close to a whole number 2. You might want to round up to 3 too, but I'm just making kind of an estimate or an educated guess. So if I round each of these numbers, so I've rounded up to 2 and then I've rounded down to 2, I know that my product should be around the number 4. 2 multiplied by 2 is 4. We know how to multiply whole numbers. So that's going to help me in the placement of my decimal when I get my answer, making this little estimate here. So I'm just going to kind of put a bubble around it because I'm going to come back to that after. So this strategy involves not even using the decimals. So instead of multiplying 1.7 times 2.5, I'm just going to take the decimal out altogether, and I'm just going to multiply 17 by 25. And so I'm just going to follow the process of multiplying 2-digit by 2-digit numbers, and then I'm going to place my decimal in after I'm finished. So let's just work through this. 7 multiplied by 5 is 35. So I'm going to write my 5, carry my 3. 1 times 5 is 5, plus 3 is 8. I'm going to go down a row, write a 0, and continue on. 2 multiplied by 7 is 14. So I'm going to write the 4, carry the 1. 2 multiplied by 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3, and then I just need to add up all my numbers. So 5 plus 0 is 5, 8 plus 4 is 12, carry my 1, and 3 plus 1 is 4. So my answer looks like it's 425, but I'm going to say, wait a minute, that's reasonable for 17 multiplied by 25, but that wasn't my original equation. My original equation was 1.7 times 2.5, and I know that 2, if I'm rounding, times 2 is nowhere near 425. So I originally said I'm going to go back to my estimate. My estimate is around 4. So that being said, where should I place my decimal in this number to make my estimate, which I know is pretty reasonable, true? If I place my decimal here, my answer becomes 42.5. That's still not anywhere near my estimate of 4, so I'm going to say, nope, that doesn't make sense. If I place my decimal here, 425.0, I'm going to say, nope, that doesn't make sense because it's not anywhere near my estimate. If I place my decimal here, I get 4.25. I'm going to say, yeah, that's pretty close to my estimate. 4 whole and then decimal 25. So that would be the appropriate place. So basically this strategy is removing the decimal from the equation, multiplying as you would normally 2 whole numbers, and then placing your decimal back into the equation where is appropriate based on an estimate that you've made at the beginning. So just to finish this off, I'm just going to say that equals 4.25. And remember to always check your work in the back, and if you're making mistakes or you're not estimating appropriately, then come seek me out in class and we'll have a little lesson on making estimations and multiplying with decimals.